China is sending over 100 military personnel to the city of Xi'an. The northern Chinese city is currently under what's being called the strictest lockdown since Wuhan. Australia's Prime Minister opens a TikTok account. That's despite his warnings last year that the app may pose security risks. Is the US still boycotting the Beijing Winter Olympics? The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Beijing received visa applications from the US government to attend the Games. China gets ready to send officers and equipment to the Solomon Islands to help train the nation's police force. That's after turmoil erupted there last month, protesting a change in diplomacy. And Australia is bolstering its defenses amid Beijing's military aggression. The nation down under is now on track to cut red tape, so it's easier to buy new weapons.
Hello and welcome to China in Focus. I'm Evelyn Lee in for Tiffany this week. And the Chinese military is in Xi'an as the city continues to deal with a virus outbreak driven by the Delta variant. Apparently, 150 military medics from the Chinese Air Force were sent to local hospitals in Xi'an. That's according to Chinese state media on Tuesday. Many of them had experiences dealing with the initial outbreak in Wuhan. You'll probably remember that's the original epicenter of the pandemic. Local authorities in Xi'an have already tightened control measures to the strictest level in China. It was rarely seen since the initial outbreak in Wuhan. All residents are required to stay at home unless they go out for mass testing. Previously, one person from each household was allowed to go out to buy groceries every 2 days. But starting Monday, no one is allowed to go out even for groceries. Since locking down the city last week, authorities have placed nearly 30,000 people in hotel quarantine. On Tuesday, residents in Xi'an complained on Chinese social media Weibo. Many say they were running out of food at home. One user says, "Soon I'll be running out of food and there's nowhere to buy." Another user says, "My neighborhood management team does not care about our food supply. What should I do if I run out of stock at home? Guess I'll just starve to death?" An advocacy group is urging Beijing to release a journalist that's on the brink of death. Journalist ZhangZhan went to Wuhan to cover the initial outbreak of the virus in 2020, and then she was sentenced to 4 years in prison because of it. This Tuesday marks 1 year of that sentence. Advocacy group Reporters Without Borders says Zhang is close to death after a partial hunger strike. And when Zhang's family visited her last month, she apparently could not walk properly or even raise her head without help. Reporters Without Borders is now calling on the international community to pressure Beijing to release Zhang before it's too late. The advocacy group says Zhang risked her life reporting in Wuhan, and that at a time when very little information was available on the mode of transmission and severity of COVID-19. The group also says she should have been celebrated as a hero instead of being detained. There have been cases of reporters passing away in detention. In 2017, dissident blogger Yang Tongyan died in detention because of a lack of medical care. And this February, a tour guide that covered protests in Tibet died in detention. His name was Kunjok Jinpa, and he was sentenced to over 20 years in jail. He died because of mistreatment. A city in northeast China is being forced to suspend its public servant hiring process. That's amid plunging revenue and growing debt. The city of Hegang, formerly known for coal mining operations, officially announced the decision last week. Officials say the city must cancel plans to hire grassroots employees for government departments, citing fiscal readjustment and other major financial changes. But one social media comment suggests a more plain language explanation. That is, the city's local government no longer has the funds to support so many public servants, so it simply stopped recruiting them. The city of Hegang has been struggling with an economic slowdown in recent years. Its 2020 economic report shows a growth rate of just 0.3% last year. At the same time, its fiscal income dropped by 10%. According to the city's budget report from March, the city had accumulated around $2 billion in debt as of the end of last year. Hegang officials also warned residents about what they called an extremely severe situation back in June. They predicted the city may need to cut spending in order to cope with the challenges. Hegang is China's first prefecture-level city to endure fiscal readjustments. Some analysts say the city's problems highlight the growing pressure on local governments under the communist regime to balance their books. A state-run media outlet says China's new digital currency will be ready for service during the Beijing Olympics. But U.S. officials are cautioning American athletes against using it, citing privacy concerns. NTD's Don Ma has more.
The Chinese regime is planning to promote its new digital currency at the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics. This, according to Chinese state-run media Xinhua News. But U.S. politicians have warned American athletes to stay away. Earlier this month, a handful of U.S. lawmakers sent a letter to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, urging them to forbid American athletes from acquiring or using the new form of currency during the Games. The letter warned that the Chinese digital currency, called the digital yuan, may be used to survey Chinese citizens and those visiting China on an unprecedented scale. Here's what a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security told the Wall Street Journal.
This digital yuan is less about money and more about data.
The digital yuan is issued by the Chinese regime's central bank. It's a highly centralized type of currency and can be closely monitored or tracked by Chinese authorities.
The central bank will know who's paying, how much they're paying, when they're paying, where they're paying.
Different than U.S. financial institutions, all Chinese banks must cooperate with the Chinese Communist Party, including when they're asked to hand over clients' personal information. A 2020 report by the Atlantic Council think tank said that the Chinese regime can trace every movement of the digital yuan, as well as the identity of all transacting parties. Don Ma, NTD News.
Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison has joined controversial video sharing app TikTok. And that's even though he voiced security concerns about the app last year, saying its extension cord goes back to China. TikTok is controlled by a Chinese company called ByteDance. And under Chinese law, if Beijing asks, companies will have to hand over their user data to officials. The company says they store Australian users' data in Singapore and the US. The U.S. passed an earlier bill banning federal workers from downloading TikTok onto U.S. government devices. Morrison considered banning TikTok over security concerns last year, but he decided to not go ahead with the move, saying there is no reason to restrict those applications at this point, and noting Australia will obviously keep watching them. Morrison's new account comes as he faces a re-election. He has uploaded a video with his pet dog and turned off the comment section. Chinese state media, the Global Times, is calling the U.S. double-faced. That's after reports that China received U.S. government visa applications to attend the Beijing Olympics. The U.S. State Department soon released a statement clarifying the situation. It said that the U.S.'s diplomatic boycott of the Winter Games still stands, and it won't change its decision. The department explained that the visa applications were for consular and security personnel. They said it was routine to provide athletes with access to certain services. The White House announced the boycott earlier this month. They cited the CCP's crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. Other countries have since joined the boycott, including Australia, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, and Lithuania. Beijing is sending a temporary police group to the Solomon Islands. That's as a recent news analysis argues that the Chinese regime has been infiltrating other countries using police and security training. Here's more.
China will send a temporary police group and anti-riot equipment to the Solomon Islands. That's according to Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian during a press conference on Thursday. The Pacific Island nation also confirmed that the Chinese officers will help train the country's police force. The move follows last month's turmoil in the country when protests broke out over a 2019 diplomatic policy change. The Solomon Islands' most populous province, Maleta, stood against the national government's decision when officials decided to break ties with Taiwan in favor of Beijing. Fueled by growing discontent, last month protesters burned down dozens of buildings, centered mostly in the area's Chinatown district. The Solomon Islands government says the supplies and training from Beijing will enable local police to confront further threats. But some question what the move really means for the nation. Recent news analysis from the Epoch Times says Beijing has been infiltrating other countries using police and scrutiny training. The report says 36 countries, mostly in Africa and Latin America, have received Chinese communist regime's training on public opinion guidance system. The system includes video monitor, phone trackers, and some now with facial recognition features. The report warns Communist China's security cooperations in these countries is a threat to U.S. interests and undermine their democracies.
China's ability to collect data on global cargo flows is worrying the U.S. The Wall Street Journal reports that Beijing's worldwide logistics network would even track shipments from ports far from China. Cargo industry officials worry that the information collected may give Beijing the insight and even the power to influence world commerce. Shipping data now has become a precious commodity. Digital network logging is a star in China's cargo data system. The network calls itself a one-stop logistics information service platform. The platform builds its collections from a mix of public databases. It also relies on input from over 450,000 users in China and across the world. Industry officials say that Beijing could gain advantages by processing data crossing logging. Logging is officially called the National Public Information Platform for Transportation and Logistics. It was developed since 2007 under the power of China's Transportation Ministry. Michael Vessel, a member of the U.S. Congress's U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission, commented on the issue. He says logging could be a treasure trove of intelligence of national security and economic interest. The company website says it serves China's Belt and Road Initiative and has become a window for Beijing to share international logistics information. The U.S. Defense Department sends military equipment through global commercial ports. An official said, without commenting on logging, that China is also eyeing U.S. military logistics through Belt and Road. It's not clear how much data logging collects worldwide or who has access to the data. An industry expert commented that logging is operated by the Chinese regime and that, quote, it's difficult for free enterprises to compete with an incorporated nation. With Beijing increasingly flexing its military muscles, Australia is finding ways to bolster its defense capability. The country is set to overhaul its defense procurement process next year so that it's easier and faster for Australia to buy new weapons. It usually takes Australia 4 years to land a defense contract. But the new measures could reduce that time by as much as a year. Australia's Minister for Defense Industries says it could save millions of dollars.
And a region where tensions continue to rise.
The move comes after a warning from Australia's Defence Minister Peter Dutton. In a speech last month, he said China is on track to more than triple its nuclear warhead stockpile, and that every major city in Australia, including Hobart, is within range of China's missiles. Dutton added that Australia's defence industry can no longer be satisfied with a business-as-usual mindset. Instead, they must be driven by a mission of national significance and urgency. Australia has been on guard since its relations worsened with China. Last month, it signed a security pact with the US and the UK. Under it, Australia became the second country to get access to America's highly sensitive nuclear submarine technology.
This is the first time that the US and UK will have shared this information with a third country, ever. That was something worth securing. That was something that Australia has long sought, and our government has secured. It was worth securing access to this important defence technology and information.
The partnership would give Australia nuclear-powered submarines. They're quieter, faster, and can stay underwater longer.
This is a very important agreement for Australia's future security. There's plenty of others who don't want to see this go ahead. I think that tells you why it's so important that we do.
And just 2 weeks ago, Australia signed an over $700 million defense deal with South Korea. That's the largest defense contract that Australia has ever signed with a nation in Asia. It would give Australia radars, supply vehicles, and artillery weapons. 2021 had not been an easy year for foreign firms doing business in China. An increasingly challenging political environment in China is pushing some major Western companies to leave the country. James Zimmerman, an American lawyer based in Beijing, says that the Chinese market has become less and less palatable for Western companies. He explains that it's because of reputational risks of operating in an environment with extreme content censorship and tighter regulatory conditions. In October, Microsoft decided to shut down its LinkedIn service inside China. LinkedIn said it was due to a significantly more challenging operating environment and greater compliance requirements in China. This came after LinkedIn faced criticism for censoring posts of U.S. journalists inside China. Last month, Yahoo also pulled out of China because of the country's increasingly challenging business and legal environment. It came after a new data law came into effect. The law restricts companies from transporting Chinese data out of the country. Major American video game maker Epic Games also gave up the Chinese market. It was after Beijing banned kids from playing video games on school nights. 3 universities in Hong Kong have removed a number of on-campus artworks, all of them dedicated to victims of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. This and similar incidents are propping up concerns about the state of freedom in the city, especially after Beijing imposed its sweeping national security law on Hong Kong last year. Here's more.
A small candlelight gathering took place at the Chinese University of Hong Kong late Friday. The gathering marked the removal of sculptures dedicated to victims of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. 3 Hong Kong universities have removed artworks that memorialize the bloody suppression of China's pro-democracy movement. The Chinese University of Hong Kong confirmed last Friday that they removed a statue, one that they say was displayed without permission. They're referring to what's known as the Goddess of Democracy, a statue symbolizing the pro-democracy movement. It was inspired by an earlier statue of the same name, which Chinese troops destroyed 3 decades ago. Just one day before, Hong Kong's oldest university removed a statue centered around a similar theme. The University of Hong Kong's The Pillar of Shame. School authorities said the decision was based on legal and risk assessments. The sculpture represents the victims of Beijing's Tiananmen massacre. It had stood on the university campus for over 2 decades. Lingnan University opted to follow the same lead, also choosing to remove related artwork. Those decisions, among others, appear to be gradually silencing Hong Kong's memorials of the Tiananmen Square massacre. That's amid an apparent clampdown on the city's civic freedoms. Following last year's sweeping national security law imposed by Beijing, global English-language news platform DW News touched on the issue, citing a former Hong Kong media professional. It reported that the removal of the statues means the government is telling the world that Hong Kong is no longer free.
Some teens are reportedly convinced that they have a rare mental disorder, but it's not because a professional told them. TikTok videos did. Here's more. TikTok is feeding some teens videos about rare mental disorders. The Wall Street Journal reports it's making some think they have those disorders. Clinical psychiatrist Dr. Carol Lieberman says that makes it hard for professionals to help them.
And if they come to a professional after, it's very hard for them to give up the name, the diagnosis that they have given to themselves.
Now there are videos with the hashtag dissociative identity disorder, and they have over 700 million views, but it only affects about 1% of the U.S. adult population.
The psychological object of being a teenager is to try on different identities. That's what you do to come out with one that ultimately you feel comfortable with. So by watching hours and hours of TikTok videos with all of these different psychiatric disorders, it's not abnormal to identify with 1 or 2 symptoms here and there.
Lieberman says that doesn't mean that they have the whole disorder. But now many videos show young people as they seem to switch from one personality to another. Dr. Brianne Slay, a psychologist from Kansas City, says she was shocked to see how many videos there are about it on TikTok because of how rare it is. But why is it that some young adults tend to cling to a certain diagnosis?
That teens and young adults are using certain abnormalities as social currency. In other words, to get attention.
Lieberman says it also gives them an excuse for things they didn't get right or not being responsible. She adds that also many teens don't get enough attention from their parents. Lieberman says that if a teen comes to their parents with a self-diagnosis, they shouldn't waste time before convincing them to see a professional. And that's it for today's China in Focus. Thanks for tuning in and see you tomorrow.